What do you do when the man you gave everything to chooses the woman you trusted most and calls it love? Valara didn't scream. She didn't fight. She took off her crown, set it at his feet, looked him dead in the eyes, and walked out into the cold night without a single word. Everyone thought she was finished, broken, gone forever. But somewhere in the north, in a kingdom no dark alpha had ever lost, one man had known her name long before she knew his, and he had been waiting, not for a broken woman, for the one who was always meant to arrive. What happened next didn't just change her life. It ended the reign of every man who ever looked at her and saw something small. The first thing Valara Ashvane noticed when she walked into the great hall of Duskmere Keep was not the accusation waiting for her there. It was the silence. Not the kind of silence that comes before a ceremony, when people hold their breath out of respect. Not the kind that comes before a king speaks, and the room waits to hear his wisdom. This was a different kind entirely. The kind that is built from secrets, packed tight and heavy and full of things people have decided not to say to your face. Valara had walked through that door 100 times before. She knew the sound of it, the low murmur of the council, the scraping of iron chairs, the distant echo of the pack's wolves shifting somewhere below the ridge at dusk. She knew this room the way she knew her own heartbeat. Tonight, it was a stranger to her. 200 wolves filled the great hall, warriors who had stood beside her on the eastern borders during the raids of the Ashgrey season, elders whose grandchildren she had named at the moon ceremonies, pack healers who had sat with her through 3 brutal winters when sickness spread through the lower dens and she had refused to sleep until every last child was breathing steady. Every single one of them was looking at the stone floor, not at her, not at the thing that was about to happen to her, at the floor. Valara stood at the entrance of the hall in the ceremonial silver cape she had worn. The night she was marked as mate to Alpha Cadron Voss, 5 years ago. On a night that had felt like the beginning of everything. Her black hair was loose around her shoulders, the way he had always said he loved it. Her chin was up, her hands were still at her sides. From the outside, she looked like a woman who owned the room she was standing in. From the inside, something cold was moving through her chest. Not fear, something quieter than fear, the particular stillness that comes when a part of you has already understood what the rest of you is still refusing to accept. Across the hall, on the raised platform where the Alpha's great chair sat, the one carved from black wood and iron, the one she had sat beside for 5 years, stood Cadron. He was tall, 6 feet and 2 inches of pack-born strength, with the kind of jaw that made lower wolves instinctively step back and the kind of amber eyes that glowed faintly gold when he was using his alpha authority. He wore his ceremonial black and deep red tonight. His jaw was set. His expression was the one she had learned over 5 years to read as the face he made when he had decided something and did not want to be questioned about it. Beside him, seated in the chair that had always been hers, was a woman named Sarah Vinay. Valara had known Sarah for 3 years. She had met her when Sarah arrived at Duskmere as a trade envoy's daughter, soft-spoken and sharp-eyed, with a way of laughing at Cadron's jokes that made him stand just slightly taller. She had befriended her. She had brought her inside the inner circle. She had trusted her at the healer's table, at the morning councils, at the evening fires where pack leadership gathered and spoke freely. She had called her a friend. That was the part that sat the heaviest. Not that Cadron had chosen someone else, but that she had looked at Sarah every single day for 3 years and never seen it clearly. That she had trusted her own eyes, and her eyes had failed her completely. Valara walked forward into the hall. Her steps were even, no hurry, no hesitation. She stopped 10 feet from the platform. Cedron descended 1 step. His expression was careful, composed. Not cold and not cruel, but something almost worse than both. The expression of a man who had already closed a door in his chest and sealed it shut. and was now simply waiting for the formality of what came next. "Valara," he said. His voice carried the low resonance of alpha authority. The council needed to be present. That was the right way to do this. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Sarah, who dropped her gaze and pressed her lips together. Sarah's hands in her lap were perfectly still, whether from guilt or from a practiced calm that was something else entirely. Valara could not tell. She had spent 3 years thinking she understood that woman. She had been wrong about a great many things. "The right way," Valara said, her voice quiet and perfectly level. "What has been between us has been wrong for a long time." Cedrin's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "You know it, I know it. This is not punishment, Valara. This is truth. I am choosing Sarah, publicly, with the council as witness." The hall did not react. Not a sharp breath, not a scrape of a boot on the stone floor, not one sound of surprise. And that was the most telling thing of all. They had known, every wolf in this room. They had watched this coming for months, maybe longer, and not one of them had walked to her door and said her name and told her what was approaching. Not one. Something inside Valara's chest began to change, not to break, to change, the way water changes when the cold goes deep enough. Not cracking, becoming something harder, something clearer. "You called the full council," she said softly, "for a personal matter." 2 of the younger warriors near the far wall looked up briefly, then looked away. "It is a pack matter," Cedrin said. "Is it?" She let the question sit without helping it along. "Or did you want witnesses because you wanted to be certain?" I understood. There was no going back. That you wanted to be certain I would not. She paused. "Make any claims." The word she chose was deliberate. Cadrin's eyes flickered. Something moved behind them. Not guilt. She knew what guilt looked like on him. This was something closer to irritation. The irritation of a man who had expected this to be cleaner than it was becoming. "I want there to be no confusion afterward," he said. "No questions about Sarah's position. No questions about the mate bond. No questions about the mate bond. 5 years. 5 years of this. Of managing the 14 alliance agreements that kept Duskmere Pack from a territorial war on 3 sides simultaneously. 5 years of being the one in every back room, every difficult negotiation, every long silent midnight where pack decisions were made that nobody ever announced and nobody ever gave credit for. 5 years of sitting beside this man through plague season and the border raids and the summer. The river flooded 3 outer settlements, and she had organized the rebuilding entirely while he was at the northern muster. 5 years, and the word he used was claims, like she was an outsider trying to take something that did not belong to her. Valara reached up slowly and unclasped the silver chain at her throat, the one that held the mate stone, the deep amber pendant that every pack in the 7 territories would recognize as the mate mark of Duskmare's alpha. She held it for exactly 1 breath. Then she placed it on the step in front of the platform. The sound of it against the stone was very small. Cadrin's eyes went to it immediately. Something moved through his face, fast, complicated, gone before she could name it. "Valara, don't," she said. 1 word, soft, final. She turned and looked at the hall, at every face pointed at the floor, at the elders whose families she had protected, at the warriors she had bled beside, at the healers she had stayed up with through the long, cold nights when the children were sick and someone had to keep the fires going. She let herself feel the full weight of what they had done by staying silent. Then she spoke. "You all watched this happen." Her voice did not rise. It did not shake. It simply filled the room the way stone fills a wall, solidly, completely, without asking permission. Every one of you. You watched your alphas chosen slowly take the seat beside him, and not one wolf in this room found the courage to say a word to me. The floor became very interesting to a great many people. I held this pack through the Ashgrey sickness. I held it through the border wars. I have been holding it together every single morning while your alpha stood somewhere else. and none of you said a word." She paused. She looked at old Elder Maywin in the third row, a woman who had held Vailara's hand the night the mate bond was made, who had called her daughter and meant it, who was now sitting with her eyes pressed to her lap and 2 tears moving slowly down her weathered face. "Cords," Valara said. It was the quietest word in the room. It hit like a stone dropped from a great height into still water. The rings it made spread outward and touched every wall. Kadrin stepped forward. His alpha dominance rose with him. That particular pressure that every alpha carries like a second body, rolling through the air and pressing against the instincts of every wolf present. The lower wolves in the room dropped their chins without meaning to. Even the senior warriors shifted. Valara felt it press against her, against the mate bond that still existed between them, dimming but not yet gone. She held his gaze and did not move. He stopped for just a moment. One strange, exposed moment in the middle of all those witnesses. Alpha Kadrin Voss looked like a man who had not entirely thought through the consequences of what he was doing. "You will have the Eastern House," he said finally. "You can remain in Duskmere territory. You will be cared for." "I am not. I am leaving," Valara said. "Valara, not the Eastern House, Kadrin." She turned toward the great doors. "The territory." A sound moved through the hall then, not quite a gasp, something between alarm and the particular discomfort of 200 wolves, realizing they were watching something irreversible happen and had no way to stop it. Because wolves did not simply leave packs. To leave without an invitation from another alpha was to become packless, a rogue, unaffiliated, unprotected. In a world that was not gentle to wolves without a home, it was one of the most dangerous things a person could choose. Valara knew all of this. She also knew that staying in a comfortable house on the edge of Kadrin's territory, watching him build a life with Sarah through the windows of a life she used to have, that was not surviving. That was a slow vanishing dressed up as mercy. She turned toward the doors. Behind her, she heard Sarah's voice for the first time that night. A small, uncertain sound. "She doesn't have to leave entirely. Let her go," Kadrin said. Low, rough-edged. Something complicated and too late moving underneath it. Valara walked out of Duskmere, keep on a cold October night. No pendant, no cape, no wolf beside her. The great doors closed at her back. She shifted the moment she cleared the outer walls. The change came the way it always came for her. Not with pain, not with effort, but with the particular relief of becoming what she actually was. Her bones rearranged themselves. The world flooded with scent and sound and the deep animal clarity that only wolf form brought. 4 paws met cold earth. Her wolf was large for a female, deep black with a single mark, a streak of silver white that ran from her jaw down the left side of her throat. Her pack had always called it the war mark. She had never understood why until tonight. She ran north. She ran until the lights of Duskmere disappeared behind the tree line, until the mate bond in her chest became a dull pull instead of a scream, until her paws found the frozen ground of the upper ridges and the air tasted of ice and coming snow and nothing familiar at all. She ran until she couldn't anymore. Then she stopped at the edge of a frozen creek, shifted back, sat down on the cold stone, and for the first time in 5 years of holding everything together, let herself completely fall apart. Nobody saw it. Nobody was there. Which was, she realized through the grief of it, exactly the problem. Nobody agreed on what Rhaegar Dun looked like. The wolf packs of the 5 kingdoms each had a different account of it. The Eastern Keeps said he was enormous, taller than most doorways, even in human form, with eyes the color of deep ice and a wolf that moved through the dark like it had been made from it. The river packs of the South said he rarely showed his face at all, that he spent weeks at a time in wolf form running his borders alone. The Highland clans had a simpler version. 3 words they said to their younger wolves when they wanted to make a point about poor decisions. Don't cross Rhaegar. Rhaegar Dun was the alpha of Vordenmoor. the northernmost and least visited territory in the known kingdoms, not feared because of cruelty. Though those who had seen him in battle spoke very carefully about what that looked like, feared because of something harder to explain, because he moved through the world as though the world's opinion of him was genuinely and completely irrelevant, because he had built Vordenmoor from the wreckage of two broken packs 16 years ago, with his own hands and his own blood, and the specific stubbornness of a man who had decided at some early and decisive point that he would not need approval to be what he was. He was not beloved by the other alphas. He was not supposed to be. He was respected the way a deep river is respected, not warmly, not casually, but with the full awareness of someone who knows what is underneath the surface. On the night, Valara Ashvane collapsed beside a frozen creek at the northern edge of Duskmir's territory. It was Rhaegar's patrol that found her, or rather, it was Rhaegar himself. He had not planned to be on the ridge that night. Vordenmoor's northern scouts covered that line twice a week on a regular rotation. It was routine. He had trackers for it, good ones. Wolves he trusted with his borders, which was the highest trust he gave. But he had found himself unable to sleep, which happened sometimes in autumn when the wind changed and carried something restless in it, something he could never quite name. And so he had shifted without explanation to anyone and run the ridge line alone. He smelled her long before he saw her. He had tracked hundreds of wolves in distress. He knew what it smelled like, sharp, copper-edged, like cold rain on iron. He had found packless wolves, injured wolves, wolves who had run from something terrible and not yet understood that they had survived it. He knew every particular note of wolf suffering. This was different. This scent was layered in a way he had not encountered before. The grief in it was old and deep, the kind that comes from something lost slowly rather than taken suddenly. But underneath that grief, beneath all the obvious pain of it, like solid rock underneath snow, was something else. Something his wolf reacted to in a way that stopped him mid-stride. He did not immediately have a name for it. He rounded a stand of frozen pines and found her. She was sitting on the bank of the creek with her knees pulled up and her arms wrapped around them, and her forehead pressed against them, shifted back to human form. Dark hair loose around her, a thin traveling cloak that was completely inadequate for this altitude and this cold. She was shaking in a controlled way, the particular kind of shaking that happened when someone was working very hard to hold the shaking in and was only partially succeeding. His two trackers fanned wide automatically, giving her space. He moved forward alone. He crouched down 8 feet from her. He stayed very still. He did not make himself small. That would have been dishonest, and she would have felt the falseness of it. But he made himself slow, careful, the way you were careful with something that was in pain and did not yet know if the world near it was safe. He said nothing. After a long moment, she lifted her head. Her eyes found him immediately. They were gray, the deep, unsettled gray of a sky before a storm opens, and there was no fear in them. He noticed this, the way you notice something genuinely unusual, not the way you note an observation, but the way something lands in your chest and stays there. Because a woman, alone on an open ridge in the dark, finding an unfamiliar alpha crouched nearby, should have felt something animal and sharp, some instinct of alarm. She looked at him the way you look at something you are deciding whether to trust. "Are you going to tell me to go back?" she asked. Her voice was rough from crying, but underneath that roughness was something composed, something that had decided to keep functioning regardless of what it was feeling. "No," Rhaegar said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she straightened slightly, brushed her hair back from her face with a hand that was not entirely steady, and sat up with the particular dignity of someone who had decided the conversation was going to happen in a certain way. "You're from Vordenmoor," she said. "Not a question." "Yes." "You're Rhaegar Dunn." Also not a question. He tilted his head slightly. You know who I am. Every wolf north of the Iron Rivers knows who you are." She paused, and something crossed her face, not quite a shadow, but the ghost of one. "Then you know what it means that I'm sitting on the edge of your patrol line. It means I found you before the cold did," he said, "and that your feet are bleeding through your boots." She looked down, then back up at him. "I can shift. I don't need." "You do," he said. "My healer is at the eastern outpost, 2 miles north. You can shift and run it in 15 minutes. A long silence. "I don't take charity," she said. "I didn't offer any." He stood slowly. "I offered a healer and a fire. Whether that is charity depends entirely on what you do next." Something moved through her expression. Not quite a smile. She was nowhere near a smile, but the shape of one somewhere underneath. The suggestion that somewhere inside her, the part that appreciated a well-made point, was still alive and paying attention. She shifted. Her wolf appeared, and the moment it did, his 2 trackers both took a step backward without meaning to. Not from fear, from recognition. Because the black wolf with the silver war mark that stood on the frozen bank of that creek was not a wolf that had been broken by tonight. It stood the way mountains stand, without needing anything from the sky above it. Rhaegar looked at her wolf for 3 full seconds. Then he shifted. His wolf was exactly what the stories described. Enormous, built like moving shadow, so black it seemed to pull the darkness toward it rather than reflect it. His eyes, pale and ice blue in human form, were the same in wolf form. They settled on hers. He turned north. She followed. They ran together across the frozen ridge. The most feared alpha in the north, and a woman who had just walked out of everything she had built her life around. And neither of them made a sound, because running together in wolf form does not require words. It requires only the willingness to move in the same direction. And they were both, for entirely different reasons, already pointed north. At the outpost, a small, efficient, older woman named Ditha cleaned Violara's feet with practiced hands and made her drink something hot that tasted of pine bark and wild honey. Violara sat on a low wooden stool and let it happen without protest. Rhaegar sat across the fire from her. He had things he could have asked. He had trackers who could know everything about her within a day. He asked none of it. She looked up at one point and found him watching the fire with his forearms resting on his knees, hands loose, making no demands on the space between them. "Why aren't you asking?" she said. He looked at her. "Would the answers change anything I plan to do tonight?" "What do you plan to do tonight?" "Give you somewhere to sleep that isn't a frozen creek bank." She held his gaze for a moment. This close, in the firelight, she could see the full map of him. The scar that ran from the corner of his jaw to the base of his throat. A second one across his left forearm, and behind his pale eyes a kind of stillness that did not belong to someone who had never suffered. It belonged, she recognized it immediately, to someone who had suffered enough to stop being afraid of it. She looked away first. "My name is Valara Ashvane," she said quietly, "late mate of Alpha Cadron Voss of Duskmere." "I know," he said. She looked back at him sharply. "Duskmere borders my southern territory," he said. "I have known who you are for 3 years. You renegotiated Duskmere's grain alliance with the Heron clans single-handedly 2 years ago when your Alpha was at the Western Muster. The terms you got were better than anything the previous agreement had managed in 20 years. Valara stared at him. "I know the difference," Rhaegar said, "between a pack with a strong alpha and a pack with a strong mate." Something hit the back of her throat unexpectedly. Not tears. She had used all of those on the creek bank. Something older and deeper than tears. The particular devastation of being seen accurately, completely, by a stranger, after years of being looked past by people who were supposed to know you better than anyone. She turned back to the fire before he could see it fully. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight." "Don't thank me yet," Rhaegar said. "Thank me when you've decided where you're going." Valara stared into the fire. She had no idea where she was going, but for the first time, since she had walked out of Duskmere Keep. She felt something she had not expected to feel for a very long time. The faint, fragile, startling sense that the answer to that question was something she might actually survive finding. 3 days at Vordenmoor's eastern outpost became a week became 2. Valara had told herself each morning that she would decide a direction and begin moving in it. She would lie in the narrow bed in the small, warm room they had given her. Plain stone walls, a good thick blanket, a window that looked out over the frost-covered ridge, and she would count the ceiling beams and tell herself that today was the day she would figure out what came next. Then she would get up, and somehow the day would find her. The outpost was not large. 40 wolves, a forward station of Vordenmoor's full territory 3 miles north. But it ran like something that had been designed by someone who had thought through every detail. The watch rotations were clean. The supply stores were organized with a logic that made sense the moment you looked at them. The training yard, below the main house, was not a place of performance and pride. The wolves there pushed each other hard and without cruelty, and helped each other up when they went down. On the 3rd day, Valara found herself standing at the edge of that training yard because she had nothing else to do. She watched 2 younger wolves struggle with a grappling technique for a while, getting it wrong twice, then a 3rd time, and then, without quite deciding to, she stepped forward. "You're dropping your weight too early," she told the shorter of the 2. "You're committing before you have the angle. Wait for the shoulder to open and then drop." Both wolves looked at her. She demonstrated the adjustment without ceremony. The shorter one tried it. It worked cleanly. By the time she had registered what she was doing, 4 other trainees had drifted over. She told herself it was one afternoon. On the 5th day, she was in Deetha's stores reorganizing the medicinal bark bundles by potency rather than by size. A system she had used at Duskmere that was twice as fast to search in an emergency, and Deetha watched her do it with bright, knowing eyes and said nothing at all, only smiled privately to herself when she thought Valara wasn't looking. On the 8th day, Rhaegar came to find her. He found her in the strategy room, which she had wandered into the day before out of restlessness. She was standing at the wall of maps, large, detailed maps of the northern territories, every border marker and trade road and river crossing and pack boundary carefully inked. She was reading them the way she always read maps, with her arms crossed and her body slightly forward, like she was listening to them say something. She heard him come in and didn't turn. "Your western boundary at the Greymere crossings is being used by Ashvin Pack." She kept her eyes on the map. "They're not crossing it officially, but the fishing records from the Greymere River for the past 2 years show a seasonal harvest pattern that only makes sense if they're using the eastern bank, which is your side of the line. They know the patrol doesn't cover that stretch before the thaw." A pause. "That explains something that has bothered me for 2 seasons, Rhaegar said. "There's more." She turned then. "If you want it, tell me," he said simply. He walked into the room and came to stand beside her at the map wall, close enough to see what she was indicating, not so close as to crowd her. She told him the rest. She talked for 30 minutes. She had been absorbing these maps without intending to, and her mind had been doing what it always did, finding gaps, finding pressures, finding the quiet places where problems were building without anyone watching yet. He listened without interrupting. When he asked questions, they were precise and showed that he understood the strategic weight of what she was describing faster than most council members she had briefed in 5 years at Duskmere. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "You should have had a territory of your own," Rhaegar said. She looked at him. Something moved through her chest, not quite pain, not quite gratitude. Something that did not have a name yet, but sat heavy and warm at the same time. "I had one," she said. "I just didn't have the title." Rhaegar looked at her steadily. "That changes." "Rhaegar, not as a replacement for what you lost." His voice was even, direct, the same way he said everything, without softening it into something easier and without making it harder than it was. As a recognition of what you are. Vordenmore's territorial strategy seat has been empty for 2 years. The work you have done in 8 days, unprompted, without being asked, is more than my last 2 advisors produced in a combined year. Violara was quiet. She had come to this outpost, bleeding and frozen, expecting a few nights of shelter before she continued on to wherever she was going. She had not expected to be given work. She had not expected to find herself useful here. She had certainly not expected to be offered anything. "I don't know if I can trust a pack again," she said honestly. "You don't have to trust a pack," Rhaegar said. "Trust the work. The rest can wait." She looked at him for a long time in the quiet of the strategy room, the firelight moving across the stone walls and the maps around them. Then she turned back to the wall. "The Greymere Crossing needs a marked boundary post by the end of the month before the spring fishing season opens," she said. "If you wait, Ashvin will claim seasonal right of use and the argument becomes much harder to win." She traced her finger along the western line. "And your northern supply road loses 4 days every season at the Kettlemore Ford because of ice buildup. A small drainage reroute upstream would solve it. A single week's work." "Write it up," Rhaegar said. Violara exhaled slowly. "You are very difficult, you know. I've been told," he said, completely seriously. Something that was almost a smile arrived on Valara's face, small and brief and entirely real. She turned back to the map before either of them could say anything about it. But Ditha, passing in the corridor with a bundle of dried herbs, heard the quiet sound of it through the open door and allowed herself a private smile of her own. The old healer had seen many things in her years at Vordenmoor. She had never seen Rhaegar Dunn bring 2 cups to a room unless he was planning to stay. Meanwhile, 300 miles south, Duskmere Pack was beginning to come apart at the seams. It began with the trade councils. 2 of Duskmere's 3 primary grain suppliers sent letters within the same week, politely worded, professionally distanced, citing scheduling difficulties as the reason for pausing their winter agreements. Elder Maywin brought the letters to Cadron at morning council and laid them on the table with the specific, careful expression of a woman who had something more to say, and had decided, for now, not to say it. Cadron stared at the letters. "Rearrange the meetings," he said. "I have tried, my alpha." Maywin's voice was perfectly neutral. The Halvanmere supplier specifically asked to speak with the mate bond holder about the road access arrangement, and she structured last harvest season. A beat of silence. "Tell them the arrangement has changed." Maywin cleared her throat. "They are aware of that. I believe that is in part why." "I said rearrange it." Maywin stopped speaking. She rolled the letters carefully and set them beside the others on the growing pile. Her hands, Cadron noticed, were very controlled. She had been on this council for 25 years. She had seen alphas make decisions they regretted. She had never seen one look quite this uncertain about a decision he had already committed to. That evening, Sarah found Cadron in the strategy room. She brought wine. She always brought something warm and thoughtful. She was good at those gestures. Small, careful attentions that made a person feel considered. She sat across from him and listened to everything he said with her full attention. She agreed with every position he had taken, every single one. And Cadron, sitting in the quiet of the room that smelled faintly of pine oil and old maps, the particular smell that had always meant Violara, because she had always burned pine oil when she worked, sat across from a woman who offered him no resistance, no challenge, no friction, and felt for the first time the faint beginning edge of something he could not immediately name. Not doubt, not quite, but something in the neighborhood of it, something that felt like realizing a room was smaller than you thought it was. He pushed it away. He was tired. He was managing the politics of a transition. These things took time. He went to bed telling himself this. In the empty rooms down the corridor, the ones that still smelled faintly of pine and cold air, and the particular quiet of a person who worked late and never noise about it. The amber matestone pendant sat on the table where Kadrin had placed it after the ceremony. He had carried it back from the platform. He had put it in her room. He had not gone in since. He told himself that was also something that took time. But time, as it turned out, was doing very little to help. The third week after the ceremony, two of Duskmere's outer settlement leaders sent requests for a meeting. Kind of request that came in formal language, but carried the particular weight of people who were worried and had been holding the worry in long enough. Kadrin met with them in the small council room. Not the great hall, the small room, the one Violara had always used for delicate conversations, because she said the smaller the room, the harder it was for people to perform. He had never thought about why she used that room before. He thought about it now. The settlement leaders were careful in how they said what they said. Polite, measured. But underneath the politeness was something that had teeth. The Eastern Road Patrols had been running thin for 6 weeks. A schedule Violara had set up 3 years ago, coordinating 4 rotating teams across the territory. So there was never a window of more than 4 hours without coverage. Kadrin had not known this system existed until the settlement leader from Hearthwick described it to him, sitting across that small table, watching him carefully for his response, because the system had quietly stopped functioning the week after Violara left. Not because anyone had canceled it, because the person who had been quietly maintaining the schedule, checking in with the 4 team captains, solving the small daily problems that kept it running, was gone, and nobody else had known enough about it to step in. Kadrin had sat at that table and nodded and said the right things. He had told them it would be addressed. He had meant it. He had gone back to the strategy room and stood in front of the map wall and looked at the Eastern Territory and felt for the first time a specific and uncomfortable clarity about what the word managing had actually meant in this pack for 5 years. It had not meant him. He had been leading, making declarations, setting the broad direction, going to the muster, being the alpha. Violara had been managing every daily coordination, every small crisis resolved before it became a large one, every relationship maintained, every schedule kept, every supplier charmed, and every elder reassured, and every settlement leader confident that someone was paying attention to them. He had thought those were small things. He understood now that they were not small. They were the actual structure holding the large things upright. Without her, the large things were beginning to lean. Sarah was trying. He could see that she was genuinely trying. She was thoughtful and warm, and she cared about getting it right. But she had no knowledge of the trade agreements, of the patrol schedules, of the long, complicated history of the 14 alliances Violara had built and maintained over 5 years. That knowledge did not live in any single document. It had lived in Violara's mind, assembled over years, constantly updated. And Kadrin had, with a single ceremony in a great hall, walked that knowledge out the door into the cold night and never once thought about where it was going. He pulled the Eastern Road Patrol schedule from the records himself. He spent 3 evenings rebuilding it from what he could piece together. He got it 60% of what it had been. He sent word to the settlement leaders. It was not the same, but it was something. He also, on one of those evenings, walked into the Luna's chambers for the first time since the ceremony. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. The room was cold. No fire had been lit in it since she left, and the cold had moved in with the particular patience of cold in rooms where people used to be. It smelled of pine oil, very faintly, the way a room still holds the shape of someone even after they have gone. The pendant was on the table where he had left it. He did not touch it. He stood in the doorway for a long time, and then he closed it very carefully and went back down the corridor and did not talk about it to anyone. Because some reckonings are private. Because some understandings can only happen in empty rooms, alone, with the evidence of your own choices laid out in front of you, where there is no one to perform anything for. He was beginning to understand something that he had not had a name for before. The difference between choosing what was easy and choosing what was true. They were not the same thing. He had spent 5 years believing they were, or at least believing that the gap between them was small enough to manage. He was discovering that the gap was, in fact, exactly the size of everything he had lost. Winter arrived at Vordenmoor like a gate closing. The mountains above the territory disappeared under white within 2 weeks of the first snowfall, and the world became a place of black trees and stone and the clean, ringing silence that deep cold brought to high places. Valara ran the borders. She ran them in wolf form, black against the white of the snow, silver war mark, visible even in the dark, fast and deliberate. Every other morning with the patrol rotation, not because it was required, because her wolf needed the cold air and the physical reality of territorial edges and the particular satisfaction of knowing the land she was responsible for with her body, not just her eyes on a map. She had accepted Rhaegar's offer, not with ceremony. They had both agreed without discussing it that ceremony was not appropriate, not now, not given what she had left behind. She had simply begun working, and working had become staying, and staying had become, over weeks, without announcement, something that felt like belonging. She was not at peace. She would not have claimed that. The bond with Kadron was fading, not the way it had in the first days, that terrible tearing sensation, like something being pulled loose from somewhere it had grown deeply into. Quieter now, the way a fire goes quiet when the last wood is almost gone. She felt it most in the very early mornings, in the space between sleeping and waking, when old memories surfaced without permission. Kadron pulling her close after a hard victory, his voice rough with relief. The way he had laughed in the early years before. Something in him had begun to prefer the easier warmth of a woman who never pushed back, never challenged him, never showed him the harder and more honest version of himself. She grieved that man. She allowed herself to. Not the man he had become. She had no grief left for him, but the man she had loved when she was young and certain, and had believed entirely in the mate bond. That was its own particular kind of loss. She was thinking about this one gray morning at the edge of the training yard, sitting on the low wall with a cup of something hot, when a shadow fell beside her. Rhaegar. He appeared the way weather appeared, simply present, without announcement, without drama. He sat down beside her on the wall with a second cup in his hand and held it toward her. She had a cup already. She took the second one anyway, because it was cold, and because the gesture was, in its way, the most honest thing. He had brought it not to be useful, but because he had thought of her. And he was not the kind of person who pretended those things weren't true. They sat together and watched the younger wolves run drills in the snow below. "You're somewhere far away," he said finally.
Not accusation.
A simple observation, the way he stated most things. "Thinking about what loss does to a person," she said. She had stopped softening her honesty around him 3 weeks ago. It was easier with someone who treated the truth like a reasonable thing to be said. He nodded. "Does it ever stop being the biggest thing in the room?" she asked. He considered this in his particular way. Not rushing it, not filling the silence with something easy. "No," he said finally. "It gets quieter. That's different from smaller." She looked at him. "Smaller means it's going away," he said. "Quieter means you're getting larger around it." She sat with that for a moment. "Then you lost someone." Not quite a question. "My brother," Racer said, 13 years ago, in the territory wars." A pause. "He was the one who knew how to make people feel welcome in a room. I never learned that particular skill." Something in his voice when he said it, so briefly and so honestly, made her chest tighten. "I'm sorry," she said. He would have liked you, Rhaegar said. He had great respect for people who were right about things and said so without apology. He paused. He found that quality extremely aggravating and enormously attractive simultaneously. Violara turned to look at him. Like someone else I know, she said. The corner of Rhaegar's mouth moved, just slightly, just enough. She looked back at the training yard. The morning was very cold and very quiet, and perfectly still, and something between them that had been carefully held in place for weeks had just shifted, without drama, without announcement, in the way that true things shift, simply becoming something they had already been. There is a gathering in 3 weeks, Rhaegar said, moving his voice back into the straightforward register they usually operated in. 5 Kingdom Summit at Stonemark Hall. Duskmere will send a delegation. The name landed in her chest like a stone into calm water. I know, she said. You are not required to attend. I know that too. She looked down at her cup. I'm going, he said nothing. I'm not going to spend my life walking around rooms to avoid the person who made the wrong choice, she said. I left because I had to. That is done. I'm not hiding from what happened. Rhaegar looked out at the snow. I ran from what was difficult once, he said. For about 18 months, I moved it from a problem in front of me to a problem behind me. It did not become smaller in the distance. What did you do? I turned around, he said simply. The second time I faced it, it was half the size I had made it in my own mind. She exhaled slowly. I'll need to attend as Vordenmoor's territorial advisor, she said. Officially, if I arrive without a clear role, every delegation there will spend the entire summit deciding what I am and why I am there. Then attend officially, Rhaegar said. The title is real. It needs to be recognized by the council. In writing, it will be by morning. She nodded once. They sat in the cold for another few minutes, not quite touching, not quite separate, occupying the particular space that had developed between them over weeks of shared fires and honest work and silences that required nothing from either of them. Then she stood, set down one of the cups, and went back to the training yard. Rhaegar watched her go. He sat on the wall in the cold for a long time after she left, very still. The way a man sits when he has spent a long time building walls and has only recently begun to notice that the walls have gaps, not because they were poorly built, but because something on the other side of them had begun quietly and without asking to matter. He picked up the remaining cup, looked out at the snow, said nothing, but something in his expression, in the private stillness of the empty wall, looked the way high country looks in very early spring. Still mostly winter, but with the first small signs of something that cannot be stopped. The 5 Kingdoms Summit at Stonemark Hall happened once every 2 years. It was the North's most significant political gathering. The alphas and senior councils of 5 kingdoms meeting at a neutral stronghold for 3 days of treaty reviews, territorial adjustments, and the kind of careful alliance building that kept powerful pacts from becoming catastrophic ones. Violara had attended 3 of these summits as Duskmere's mate bondholder. She arrived at the 4th as Vordenmoor's head territorial advisor. She wore Vordenmoor's colors for the first time. Deep charcoal gray and black, a heavy travel coat over dark wool, her hair pinned simply. No matestone, no ceremony silver. Only a plain iron ring on her right hand that Ditha had pressed into her palm the morning they departed wordlessly, with the specific expression of someone giving you something they want you to carry into a hard place. Violara had put it on without comment. The Vordenmoor delegation arrived at Stonemark Hall at midday. The stone complex sat at the crest of a long ridge above the tree line, built on neutral ground, visible from all 4 directions, deliberately offering no tactical advantage to any single party. It was part of the message. Everyone here could see you and you could see everyone. Rhaegar walked at the head of the delegation. No announcement, no ceremony. He simply walked, and the room he walked into reorganized itself the way rooms always reorganized around him. Not from form, but from the particular gravity of someone who had never needed the room's permission to enter it. Valara walked 2 steps to his right, the formal position of a senior advisor. She felt the moment the other delegations registered her presence. It moved through the entrance hall like a current under still water, a contained ripple, passing from face to face, too controlled to be called a gasp, but unmistakably a response. The Ketlamore Alpha's second stopped speaking mid-sentence. The Halvanmere elders turned toward each other with quick, low words. The Ashfin delegation shifted collectively. And then there was Duskmere. Kadrin was standing near the eastern hearth with 3 of his council members, speaking to the Ketlamore Alpha with the particular ease of a man who was very good at performing confidence in a room. He turned when the energy changed. He saw her. Every muscle in his body went still at the same moment. Valara had thought about this moment many times in the weeks since she had left. She had imagined it various ways. The anger rising, the grief pulling at her, the terrible pull of something familiar. She had prepared herself for all of those things. She felt none of them. She felt clear, like a window that had been cleaned. She met Kadrin's eyes across the hall for exactly 3 seconds. She let him see that she was there, and that she was well, and that she was wearing different colors and standing in a different position than the one he had removed her from. Then she turned to the Halvanmere Alpha, who was approaching to introduce himself, and gave him her complete attention. Behind her, Kadrin's hands, held carefully behind his back where no one could see them, slowly closed. The summit's first day was territorial business. Boundary reviews, trade road concerns, patrol schedule alignments, 3 outstanding disputes from the last gathering. Valara sat in Vordenmore's position at the strategy table and presented 4 proposals in the morning session. The first was the Greymere crossing. She laid out the evidence: seasonal harvest records, the original treaty language, terrain surveys, 2 years of cross-reference patrol reports. With the clean precision of someone who had spent months making sure every piece was exactly where it needed to be. No drama, no emotion. Just evidence arranged so clearly that arguing with it would require arguing with the record itself. Ashfin's Alpha, a large, weathered man named Aldrich, listened with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. When she finished, the room was quiet. "You have survey documents," he said. "I have 3 sets," Valara said, "independent, from different seasons." Aldrich looked at Rhaegar. Rhaegar's expression was completely neutral. He had said nothing during her entire presentation, which was itself a statement. This was hers. He was not backing it. He was not explaining it. He was sitting beside it and letting it stand on its own. "A boundary walk before the spring fishing season," Aldrich said finally. "Both parties present." 1 week's work, Valara confirmed. "It resolves cleanly." "Agreed," Aldrich said. He did not sound pleased, but he said it. The second and third proposals went similarly. The fourth concerned Duskmere, a trade road access question that had been technically unresolved since the last summit. Old business, 3 sentences to present. The entire room watched Kadrin, half to formally respond to a proposal delivered by the woman he had removed from the seat beside him. He did it with his chin up and his voice perfectly measured. He agreed to the access terms. He was professional. He was also, Valara could see from across the table, shaken beneath the surface in a way he was working very hard not to let reach his face, because she was not what he had expected to find here. She understood, without needing to be told, exactly what he had expected. He had expected to find her diminished, perhaps softened by difficulty, perhaps quieter, perhaps grateful for whatever small corner she had managed to shelter in. Perhaps, on some level, he had never admitted to himself ready to be recovered, to come back, to accept a lesser position, to need him in the way that would have made his choice feel less like a mistake. He found her instead in Vordenmore's seat, presenting territorial cases to 5 kingdoms, winning all 4, while the most feared Alpha in the north sat beside her and said nothing. because he had no need to say anything. She watched Kadrin recalibrate in real time. She felt nothing about it except a distant, tired pity. That evening, during the formal dinner, the Halvan Mir Alpha's mate, a sharp, silver-haired woman named Bryneth, leaned toward Vaelara and said, voice low and dry, "First time in 3 summits I have watched Aldrich agree to a boundary concession without 3 days of arguing." "The evidence was sufficient," Vaelara said. "Evidence is always available," Bryneth said. "What is rare is the person presenting it knowing exactly which way to hold it, so no one can look away." She picked up her wine. "Vordenmoor does well, though I expect you know whose loss is whose in this arrangement." Her eyes moved briefly, without drama, toward Kadrin's position at the table. Vaelara looked at her plate. "Dustmere's strength has always been in its people," she said carefully. Bryneth made a quiet, knowing sound, said nothing else. Across the table, Rhaegar had watched the exchange. He had the particular ability to track multiple conversations while appearing focused on only one. She had noticed this about him over months. His pale eyes met hers briefly over the rim of his cup. He said nothing, but the quality of that look, steady, clear, the specific attention of someone who had been watching not to observe, but because you were something they genuinely wanted to see, landed in her chest with a warmth that she was not quite ready to name and was finding increasingly difficult to ignore. She looked away. She ate her dinner. She was very carefully not thinking about Rhaegar Dunn. She did not entirely succeed. The second morning of the summit, everything changed. It began with a letter, not delivered through the official summit channels, not through the hall's message runners, slipped under the door of Vordenmoor's private chambers before first light, in a hand that left no scent anyone could track. Vaelara found it when she woke at gray light, barefoot on cold stone, still pulling herself out of sleep. She read it standing in the dark, read it again, then stood very still for a long time. The letter was short, 7 sentences, unsigned, written in a hand she did not recognize. The relevant parts were these. Sarah Vinnie is not who she said she was when she came to Duskmere. She arrived not by accident but by design. She is connected to the Hallowed, the network of rogue wolves that has been destabilizing border territories for 4 years. Several members of Duskmere's council know this. The summit is the moment they have been building toward. You were not collateral damage. You were the objective. Vaelara dressed without making a sound. Then she went to find Rhaegar. He was already awake. She had yet to encounter a morning when he wasn't. He was in Vordenmoor's private receiving room with his head of security, a hard-eyed woman named Commander Fyra, going over the day's schedule. He looked up when she entered and read her face in 1 second. "Out," he said to Fyra. Fyra left without a word. Vaelara set the letter on the table. Rhaegar read it once, then again. He set it down carefully and looked at her. "You know about the Hallowed?" she said. "Yes." His voice was very even. 4 years of coordinated pressure on territorial borders, raider strikes that leave no pack markings, outer settlements going dark without explanation. He paused. The pattern has been consistent. Every targeted territory had something in common. "Leadership instability," Vaelara said. "Yes." Specifically a mate bond position that was vacant or compromised. She looked at him steadily. Every pack that has lost its strategic center in the last 4 years, through death, through abandonment, through removal, has had increased raider activity within 6 months. Every single one. Rhaegar was very still. "Sarah was not an accident," Vaelara said. "She was a placement. They chose Duskmer specifically, and they chose Kadrin specifically, because he was vulnerable in a particular way, to softness, to ease, to a woman who would not push back, and they placed someone exactly like that, exactly where it would do the most damage." She stopped. She felt the full weight of it settle on her. "They needed me gone, not because of Kadrin's heart, because I was the one watching the borders. I was the one who would have seen the pattern. I was the one who would have put the pieces together and gone to the other kingdoms before any of this reached a crisis. The silence in the room was very heavy. I was the target, she said quietly, not as a person, as a strategic position. Rhaegar looked at her for a long moment. Do you believe this letter? I believe it enough to verify it, she said. I know who would have access to this information inside Duskmere. There is one person on that council who was loyal to the pack before he was loyal to Cadron. Old Maywin watched everything and said nothing in the throne room. But she watches. She sees. If this came from inside, it came from her. If this is true, Rhaegar said, then the summit itself may be a target. 5 alphas under one roof. An attack here during the summit would fracture the entire Northern Alliance in one night. I know. It also means Duskmere is in danger, and Cadron. I know that too. They looked at each other across the table in the cold gray of the early morning. Something heavy and complicated and very real moved through that look, because Valara had every reason in the world to let whatever was coming for Duskmere arrive without warning. She owed that pack nothing. She owed Cadron less than nothing. And Rhaegar knew that she knew this, and he asked anyway, because it was the only honest question. What do you want to do? She exhaled slowly. Warn him, even now, not for him. Her voice was clear and completely certain. For the pack, for the wolves in those outer settlements who had nothing to do with what Cadron chose. Their safety is not canceled because their alpha made a foolish decision. Rhaegar held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, stood, and moved to the door. Fira, he said into the corridor. The commander was there immediately. Full security sweep of the premises, Rhaegar said. Start at the north gate and work inward. Everything you find, bring to me before you touch it. He turned back to Valara. Find Maywin. She was already moving. She found the old elder in the lower courtyard walking alone in the pre-dawn gray, which told her everything she needed to know about what Maywin had been carrying and how long she had been carrying it. Maywin looked up when she saw her coming. Something moved through the elder's weathered face. Relief, shame, grief, all at once, layered over each other like sediment. It was you, Valara said. The elder's chin dipped once. I could not stand beside you in that hall, she said, her voice rough. That will follow me. I am sorry for it, child. More than I have words for. Tell me everything you know, Valara said, she told her. She told her about the merchant who had traveled with Sarah and disappeared 3 days after her arrival, about the unusual interest in Duskmere's Eastern patrol schedules that had started 6 months before the Great Hall ceremony, about 2 council members who had begun receiving correspondence through back channels, letters that arrived on official seals and were never discussed openly, about the pattern of raids increasing along every territory whose strategic leadership had become unstable over the past 4 years. They build the gap first, Maywin said. They find the person holding the borders together, and they remove them. Then they move in before anyone has understood what they've lost. When do they plan to move? Valara asked. Tonight, Maywin said, during the summit's second evening session, with all 5 alphas in one room. Valara stood in the cold courtyard for one long breath. Then she squared her shoulders and went to find Cadron. She found him in the private corridor outside the morning meal hall, alone for one rare moment between his guards. He saw her coming. His whole face did 3 things at once. This is not personal, she said before he could speak. I am not here to talk about what happened between us. He listened. She told him everything, clean and direct, without adding anything that wasn't necessary. She watched his face move through defensiveness, then confusion, then shock, then something that looked finally like the expression of a man who was beginning to understand the size of what he had walked into and how long it had been building around him. When she finished, the corridor was quiet. Sarah, he started, may not have known everything she was being used for, Valara said, or may have known all of it. That is for you to determine. But the pack's safety is not a personal matter. It is a summit matter, because it involves all 5 kingdoms. I need you in the main hall in 20 minutes with your security priority in the right order." Kadrin looked at her. She had imagined this moment many times. She had imagined feeling the old love rise. She had imagined the anger. She had prepared for the grief. What she felt was distance, clear-eyed, uncomplicated distance. The recognition of someone she used to be very close to and no longer was, and the understanding that both of those things were true at the same time, and that she was, entirely and genuinely. "All right, you came to warn me," Kadrin said quietly, "after everything." "I came to protect the wolves in your territory," she said. "Those are not the same thing." He flinched, just slightly. Just once. She turned and walked back toward the summit hall. Behind her, she heard him exhale. Long, rough, the sound of a man setting down something enormously heavy, and only now fully realizing how long he had been carrying it. By mid-morning, Stonemark Hall was locked down. Fyra's team found the first hollowed signal marker, a small carved bone disc used to guide rogue wolves through unfamiliar territory, embedded in the mortar of the north gate before the morning session began. They found 3 more on the ridge paths that curved away from the hall. Someone had been in this building. The 5 alphas gathered in emergency session in the main hall. Valara stood at the front of the room. She was aware as she stood there of what she was. A woman with no inherited title, no mate bond, no history with 3 of the 5 kingdoms in this room. She had been in Vordenmoor's colors for exactly 1 season, and she was about to present the security case for the entire Northern Alliance. She presented it anyway. She laid out the Hollowed's 4-year pattern of operation. She showed the correlation between leadership instability and raider activity in 7 specific territories. She identified Duskmir's current exposure and the specific access route the Hollowed were planning to use tonight if the summit gathering went ahead as scheduled. She showed them what coordinated action looked like and why it was the only thing that worked. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Bryneth of Halvanmere said, "How long have you been tracking this?" 14 months, Valara said. "I began seeing the pattern in Duskmir's eastern border reports. At the time I did not understand what I was looking at. I understand it now." "Because you left Duskmere," Aldrich of Ashfin said, not unkindly. "Because I had time to see the whole picture instead of managing pieces of it," she said. The discussion that followed lasted 2 hours. It was sharp and detailed and at times heated. There were disagreements about timing, about resource commitments, about which pack held jurisdiction over which staging point. Valara navigated every objection with the same steady precision she had brought to the territorial proposals the morning before. Not by forcing agreement, but by making the evidence so clear that disagreement required more energy than it was worth. One by one, the 5 alphas came to agreement. That evening, Rhaegar came to find her on the upper rampart. She was standing in the last of the day's light, looking out over the ridge, the snow turning gold at the edges as the sun moved low. She heard his step and did not turn. "Fyra says the coordination is holding," he said. "It will hold," she said. "The timing is tight at the Ashfin approach, but Aldrich's captain knows what he is doing." A pause. He came to stand beside her at the railing. "You know what you did today," he said. "Presented evidence. You united 5 kingdoms in 2 hours," he said. 5 kingdoms that have been managing each other with distrust for a decade. You walked into that room with no inherited seat and no ancestral title and made them believe in a common cause." She was quiet for a moment. The cause was real. That did the work. "The cause has been real for 4 years," he said. "Nobody assembled the pieces until you." The gold was going out of the sky. Stars were beginning at the edges. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, and the thing that had been appearing in brief flashes for months, in training yards and strategy rooms and quiet mornings on cold walls, was simply present now, fully, without the careful management he usually kept around it. "Rhaegar," she said softly. "I know," he said. "Wrong moment." "I don't." She stopped, tried again. "I don't entirely know what I am yet, what I am becoming. I don't want to step from one thing into another thing without." Valara. Her name in his voice was quiet and careful in a way that did something to her chest she was not ready to examine in the middle of a summit rampart with a military operation about to begin below them. "I am not asking for anything," he said. "I am simply here." She looked at him for a long moment in the fading light. Then she did something she had not planned and had not thought through and would have argued herself out of if she had been given time to think. She reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the stone railing. Just that, just her hand on his. He turned his hand slowly. His fingers closed around hers. They stood like that, looking out over the ridge as the last light went out of the sky for perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps less. Then she let go and he let go and they went back to work. Neither of them said anything, but something that had been held at careful distance for months had quietly, irrevocably moved. The 3-point strike happened at midnight. All 5 kingdoms shifted. Valara ran with Vordenmoor. She had been assigned coordination, positioned at the high ridge with Fyra, tracking the 3 strike teams through signal fires. But when the Hollowed's main force tried to break east at the Vordenmoor staging point, she shifted. Before, she had consciously made the decision to. Her wolf hit the ground running, black against the dark, silver war mark, catching the moonlight, fast in a way that came from 18 months of studying this exact terrain on Rhaegar's maps until it was part of her. She felt Rhaegar's wolf somewhere to her left almost immediately. Not heard, felt the particular deep pressure of his presence, the way the air moved differently around his wolf. And somehow, without having run together before this night, they moved through the dark trees, together with the ease of wolves who had been running the same ground for years, reading each other's direction changes, covering each other's angles without discussion. Like they had always been this. By morning, all 3 staging points were broken. The Hollowed's northern network was in pieces. Every captured scout confirmed what the letter had said, and more. The network was older and wider than one season. Dismantling it completely would take months of coordinated work. But the summit was safe. The 5 kingdoms were intact. In the cold early light on the ridge above Stonemark, as wolves shifted back to human form and commanders gave their reports, Kadron found Valara. She was standing apart from the main group, attending to a cut on her forearm where a hollowed wolf had caught her in the fight, doing it efficiently and without fuss. He stopped 6 feet from her. He looked at her for a long time. He looked at the Vordenmoor wolves moving naturally around her, the ease of people who trusted and respected someone without performing it. He looked at Rhaegar, who had glanced toward Valara once in the last 10 minutes. Just once. But the quality of that glance, Kadron understood it, fully and finally, with the cold, sick clarity of someone seeing something true after being unable to see it for a very long time, was not the glance of an alpha watching an advisor. "I see it now," Kadron said quietly. She looked up. "Everything you were carrying," he said. "Everything I looked past." He paused. His jaw was tight with the effort of honesty. "I am not asking for anything from you. I only need you to know that I see it. What I had, what I let go of, he stopped, what I did." Valara looked at him steadily. "I hope you find out what you actually want," she said. "Not what is easy, what is real. There is a difference, and you have spent a long time avoiding it." She picked up her things and walked back toward the camp. He stood in the gray morning light and watched her go, and the expression on his face, in the honesty of that early hour with no audience left to perform for, was the expression of a man who had finally, fully understood the cost of what he chose. The summit ended. The 5 kingdoms went home. Vordenmoor's delegation returned north through the mountain passes in pale winter light. The silence of the journey was comfortable kind, tired and satisfied and full of something accomplished. Warriors slept in the wagons. Ditha distributed her traveling provisions with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times and expected exactly this much gratitude. Vayalara watched the mountains rise as they moved north and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness, not yet. That was a country still some distance away. Something quieter than happiness but more durable. The particular steadiness of a person who has walked through something hard and come out knowing themselves more clearly on the other side. Vordenmoor entered its deepest winter. The fortress territory changed when the heavy snow came, slowing, settling inward, becoming a different kind of place. The training yards were quieter in the afternoons. Evening meals in the longhouse stretched longer. Warriors told stories beside the fire. Ditha brought out her winter reserve of the amber drink that nobody else knew how to make, and that tasted like it should only be consumed in good company. Vayalara was in the longhouse most evenings now. She had not planned it. She had simply stopped leaving, because the longhouse in winter was warm and full and honest, and she had spent enough of her life in rooms that were none of those things. One evening, with the fire burning high and the pack arranged around it, in the particular contentment of people who had worked hard and earned their rest, a young wolf named Branka came and sat at Vayalara's feet. Branka was 17, serious-minded, and had attached herself to Vayalara with the particular loyalty of a young wolf who has found someone she wants to become. She had been asking questions for weeks about territorial law, about patrol strategy, about how alliances were structured, and why the language of treaties mattered as much as the terms inside them. Tonight, she had a different kind of question. She sat cross-legged at Vaylara's feet, looking into the fire, and then she asked without turning, "What does it feel like when a mate bond breaks?" The longhouse got slightly quieter, not dramatically. Just the particular change in a room when a question has been asked that everyone heard, and nobody is pretending they didn't. Valara looked down at Branka. The girl was asking genuinely. No cruelty, no performing, only the honest curiosity of someone young enough to ask the things that older people had learned to leave silent. "Like a room going dark," Valara said quietly. "A room you have lived in a very long time. You know every corner of it. You know exactly what the light looks like in the morning. And then one night the fire goes out and doesn't come back, and you are left in the dark in a room that was yours." Branka considered this. "But you go on," she said. "You find another room." "Eventually," Valara said, "but first you sit in the dark for a while, because the room was yours and that deserves to be felt." "Does it stop hurting?" Valara thought about this honestly. "The hurt doesn't disappear," she said. "It becomes something you carry differently, like something that used to be too heavy to lift. And then, over time, you grow strong enough that it's just something you carry. You don't put it down. You just stop being stopped by it." Branka was quiet for a moment. Then, "How do you know when you are ready for something real again?" Across the fire, Rhaegar was looking at Vayalara over the heads of the wolves between them. He was not making anything of it. He was simply present and honest in the firelight, the way he always was, and the attention he gave her was the specific kind that had stopped feeling like anything she needed to manage or protect herself from. "You know," Valara said quietly, still looking at the fire rather than at him, "when something real is already happening and you are not afraid of it." Branka looked up at her. Then she looked across the fire. Then she looked back at Vayalara with the clear-eyed perception of the very young. "Oh," she said simply. Vayalara looked at the fire and said nothing else, but she did not look away from Rhaegar's direction either. And Ditha, sitting to Vayalara's left, with her cup and her private observations, made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, but somewhere in between. The sound of someone watching something she had been waiting to see for a long time and finding it, finally, exactly as good as she had hoped. In the weeks that followed, 3 things happened at Duskmere that the messenger birds brought north. Sarah Vin left Duskmere quietly 2 days after the summit ended. The official account said she chose to leave. The unofficial account, relayed by Maywin through a trusted courier, said Kadrin had sat with her for a full day after Stonemark, asking questions, and that, by the end of that day, the nature of what she was and what she had known had become clear enough to make her position impossible. The second thing, Kadrin sent a formal request to all 5 kingdoms for a coordinated investigation into the Hollowed's remaining network. It was the right decision, made 3 months later than it should have been, but made. Violara acknowledged this privately and moved on. The third thing, Kadrin sent a personal letter to Vordenmoor, addressed to Rhaegar, with a note for Violara added at the end, in handwriting that was nothing like the formal script of the official text. I have no right to ask for understanding. I only want you to know that I am trying to become someone who deserved what he had. I know I am too late for that to matter to you. I am not doing it for you. I am doing it because it is what I should have been doing all along. Violara read it at the strategy table. She set it down. She sat with it for a while. Then she put it away in the drawer at the corner of the desk where she kept the things that mattered and required no further action. Rhaegar came in from the training yard. He read her face the way he always read her face now, immediately, accurately, without effort, and poured 2 cups of something hot and sat across from her. She slid the letter across. He read it. "What do you want to do?" he asked. The question she had come to know as his most essential one. Not what should we do? Not what is the right answer. What do you want? Nothing, she said. He is trying. That is his work to do, not mine. She paused. I am glad he is doing it, that's all. Rhaegar nodded. She looked at him, at the scar along his jaw and the steady pale eyes and the particular way he held a cup, loosely, like a man who was comfortable in his own hands, at the months of small, honest moments that had accumulated between them into something she no longer had any interest in pretending was simply professional. Rhaegar, she said, yes, I have been thinking about something. I know, he said. She looked at him. How do you know? Because you always touch that iron ring when you are thinking about something that matters, he said. And you have been touching it for 3 days. She looked down at her hand. She had not noticed. She looked back up at him. I am not afraid of this, she said quietly. I thought I would be. I thought, after everything, I would need a great deal more time before I could look at something real and not flinch from it. But I have been here for months, and I know what this is, and I know what it is not, and I am not afraid. The room was very still. Rhaegar stood slowly. He came around the table and stood in front of her, and she stood too. And they looked at each other in the firelight of the strategy room, with the maps of their shared territory on every wall around them. He put his hand along the side of her face, careful, certain. I have been trying very hard, he said quietly, not to ask for more than you were ready to give. I noticed, she said. It was not easy. Good, she said, and she kissed him. It was nothing like drama, nothing like the sweeping declarations that stories were supposed to be made of. It was quiet and warm and entirely certain, the way only real things are certain. He put his arm around her carefully, and she leaned into him, and there was no performance in it. No managing, no holding back. Just 2 people who had taken the long road to this moment and earned it honestly. When they separated, the room felt different. Not larger, not smaller, simply true. The particular feeling of a space where something honest has just happened in it. I should tell you something, Rhaegar said. Tell me. The Vordenmoor Council has been asking me to formally name a second-in-command for 3 years, he said. I told them 4 months ago that the position was filled. She looked at him. You told them. She stopped. Rhaegar, I had only been here 3 weeks, he said. And you had already identified 4 strategic vulnerabilities that my previous advisors missed in 2 years. The position was filled. You simply had not decided yet. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly, and the smile that came was the fullest one he had seen on her face in all the months she had been at Vordenmoor. You are the most infuriating man I have ever met, she said. I prefer strategically decisive, he said. She pressed her forehead against his jaw. His arm tightened around her, and he held her in the quiet of the strategy room with the fire crackling and the maps on every wall. And neither of them said anything else, because they were both people who understood that some moments were worth more kept than spoken. Word traveled through the 5 kingdoms the way important things always traveled. Not in official announcements, but in the particular way that truth moves when it has become undeniable. Every pack leader in the north now knew the full account. Not just the battle at Stonemark, not just the coordinated strike. The full story, the full 14 months of pattern analysis, the intelligence that had brought 5 historically distrustful kingdoms to agreement in 2 hours. The woman who had arrived at Vordenmoor with nothing and had, in 1 season, rebuilt the entire Northern Alliance's strategic framework from the foundation up. They asked for another summit, not at neutral Stonemark, at Vordenmoor, requested by the other 4 alphas, informal letters delivered through official channels, with the specific and unprecedented language of kingdoms that wanted to come to you, not meet you in the middle. They gathered in the 2nd week of March, when the snow had begun to ease and pale light was returning to the mountain territory. All 4 visiting alphas, their senior councils, the full Vordenmoor assembly. They came into Vordenmoor's great hall, carved into the mountainside itself, lit by iron torches and the particular quality of late winter light through high narrow windows, and they filled it. Valara stood beside Rhaegar at the front of the hall. She wore Vordenmoor's deep gray and black, the iron ring on her right hand, her hair loose around her shoulders. No crown, no ceremonial silver, nothing borrowed and nothing performed. She looked like herself. That was all. That was everything. Bryneth of Halvanmere spoke first. What we are proposing has not been done before, Bryneth said, her voice carrying through the stone chamber without effort. Not in the recorded history of the 5 kingdoms. And yet, Aldrich of Ashford said, here we are. Bryneth looked at Valara directly. You unified 5 kingdoms, not from an inherited seat, not from a throne or a mate bond or an ancestral claim, from evidence, from the specific rare quality of a mind that could see the whole field when everyone else was managing their own corner of it. She paused. The Northern Alliance has operated without unified strategic leadership for 40 years. We have relied on summits every 2 years, slow, reactive, managing crises after they have already arrived. What you built at Stonemark and what you have built there suggests something different is possible. What are you proposing? Rhaegar said. Joint appointment, said Ketlamoor's alpha, a quiet, gray-haired woman named Oswin, whose words were few and whose positions were unshakable. Alliance High Strategist, accountable to all 5 kingdoms collectively. Not beneath any single alpha, a new position, a real one. The hall was still, and then Cadron Voss walked forward from the back of Duskmir's delegation. He had changed in the months since the great hall ceremony. There were lines in his face that had not been there before. He moved differently, more carefully, the way a person moves when they have stopped assuming the room belongs to them and have started earning their place in it instead. He walked to the center of the hall. He stopped in front of Valara. The entire assembled council watched. He met her eyes. His jaw was tight with the effort of something that was the opposite of arrogance. And then Alpha Cadron Voss, in front of the leadership of 5 kingdoms, went to one knee. The sound that moved through the hall was not a gasp. It was a silence so absolute and so charged that it was louder than any gasp could have been. Because alphas did not kneel, It was simply not done. In the culture and hierarchy of wolf packs, it was as significant as anything Valara had done in Duskmurray's great hall on the night she had set down the mate stone and walked out the door. Perhaps more. I was wrong, Cadron said. His voice was rough and completely honest and had no performance in it. I removed you from a position you had built and earned and protected with, and I did it to avoid being known, to avoid being challenged, to protect something in myself that did not deserve protecting. And I have watched every day since then how wrong I was, not because of what it cost me, because of what it cost the people I was supposed to be protecting. The hall was completely still. I owe you nothing except honesty, he said. And the honest thing is that what I did was wrong, and that you deserve better than what I gave you, and that this. He looked around the hall at the 5 kingdoms gathered at what she had built from the night she walked away with nothing. This was always who you were. I was simply too afraid of it to let it be. He held her gaze. His amber eyes were steady and completely clear. Valara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the great hall of Dustmere, the mate's stone on the cold step, the doors closing at her back in the dark, the frozen creek, Rhaegar crouching in the snow and asking nothing. She thought about everything that had been built since. She reached out and placed her hand briefly on Cadron's shoulder. Not forgiveness of the wound. Some things leave marks that do not go away, and that is honest. But recognition of the truth in what he was doing and the work it cost him to do it. Stand up, Cadron, she said quietly. He stood, and then, from somewhere in the back of the hall, a single fist struck a chest. The wolf salute, the oldest gesture of genuine respect in pack culture. No words, no ceremony, just a fist against the heart. It was one of Vordenmoor's youngest warriors, barely 18, stationed at the rear wall, who had been at the eastern outpost the night Rhaegar had brought a woman in from the frozen ridge and given her a fire and asked her nothing. Then Fyra, Vordenmoor's commander, who had watched her run borders in present cases and hold ground without flinching for an entire season. Then Ditha, who was crying openly and not trying to hide it. Then Halvanmir's guard. Then Ketlamore's council. Then Ashvin's warriors. It spread through the hall in seconds. The sound of 5 kingdoms giving recognition, not to a title, not to a throne, not to a bond, to a woman who had never once asked for it. Bryneth looked at Valara. Will you accept? Valara was quiet for a moment. She looked at Rhaegar. He was already looking at her. His pale eyes were steady and completely honest. That specific attention she had come to know as the most real thing in her world. He gave her the smallest nod. Not instruction, not permission. This is yours. It was always yours. Valara looked out at the hall, at the 5 kingdoms, at Cadron standing straight and clear-eyed, at young Branka near the front with her fist pressed to her chest and her face streaked with tears, at Ditha, at Fyra, at every wolf who had run with her through the dark and the cold and the long, uncertain months of becoming something none of them had fully named yet. She took one breath. Yes, she said. The hall broke open. Wolves did not applaud with polite hands. They stamped their feet and struck the stone tables and raised their voices, and the sound filled the mountain hall and rose through the high windows into the cold March air above the peaks. It was enormous and alive and completely real. In the middle of all of it, Rhaegar stepped to her side, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her, the place he had been since the night he crouched in the snow, 8 feet from a woman who was not afraid of him, and decided in that moment that this was someone worth being still for. He said nothing. He simply stood there, solid and warm and present in the way that things which are permanent are present. She leaned her shoulder against his. He put his arm around her, not for the room, not for the moment, because it was true. And they were both people who had stopped pretending that true things were anything other than what they were. Far south in Duskmere Keep, in the empty great hall where the morning light fell through the high windows and landed on cold stone, The amber mate stone pendant sat on the table in the Luna's chambers. Cedron had not moved it in all the months since the ceremony. He had come back to Duskmere after the summit and walked into the chambers for the first time and stood in the room that still smelled faintly of pine oil and cold air and the particular quiet of someone who had worked late and never made noise about it. He picked up the pendant. He held it in both hands. He looked at it the way a person looks at evidence of who they used to be. Not with hatred, not with love, but with the clear, hard gaze of someone doing the difficult work of honest accounting. He set it down on the table carefully. He had work to do. He would do it. He would earn back the trust of the pack he had endangered through blindness and pride. He would not waste the education that had cost him everything. Somewhere north of him, through 3 mountain passes still deep in winter, across frozen ridges and black pine forests, beyond the borders of every territory he would ever lead. The woman he had underestimated was standing in a great hall full of howling wolves, with her shoulder against the arm of a man who had known her name before they had ever met and had never once asked her to be less than she was. She was not a thing recovered. She was not a wound healed. She was not someone else's ending or beginning or redemption. She was exactly what she had been becoming through every season of loss, through every room where no one stood beside her. Through every cold night, she ran alone into the dark and kept moving anyway, herself fully, finally, completely. And in the north, in the late winter light of the mountains, the most feared alpha in 5 kingdoms stood beside her and did not crown her, because he had never needed to, because what she carried had always been hers, because the people who truly see you do not give you your power. They simply make sure there is enough space for you to stand in it. 3 weeks after the appointment, Valara was in the strategy room late, the fire low, maps spread across the table, 2 cups of Deetha's amber drink going cold beside the ink, when Rhaegar came in from the northern patrol. He was cold from the ride. He sat down across from her without ceremony and picked up one of the cups. She looked at him over the maps. The Ashvin boundary post went in yesterday, she said. Clean, both parties present. No dispute. I heard. The supply route reroute at Kettlemore is approved. Work starts next month. Also heard. She set down her pen. You didn't come in here to hear the report. No, he said. She looked at him. At everything about him that had become familiar, the scar, the still pale eyes, the particular way he occupied a room by simply being completely present in it. Then why? He set down the cup. He stood up. He came around the table and stood in front of her, and she stood too, because they both knew what this was, and neither of them was interested in performing uncertainty about it. Valara Ashvane, he said. Rhaegar, I want to ask you something, and I want to actually ask it this time. She looked up at him. Then ask. He put his hands on either side of her face, careful and certain the way he was with everything. Stay, he said. Not for the Alliance, not for Vordenmore, for this. He paused. For what we are. She held his gaze for a long moment. I have been staying for this for months, she said. I was waiting for you to say it out loud. Something moved through his face, through all that careful stillness. Something warm and deep and rare. The equivalent of light appearing in a window you had been watching for a long time. He kissed her, and she kissed him back. And the strategy room was quiet around them with the fire and the maps and the cups of cold drink and the weight of everything they had both carried to arrive at this particular moment in this particular room. It was nothing like a grand declaration. It was better than that. It was 2 people who had earned each other, honestly, in the only way that lasts. The last snow of the season fell on the spring equinox. It came down soft and silent over Vordenmoor, covering the training yards and the longhouse and the ramparts and the high ridge where 2 wolves ran the northern border in the dark, black and silver marked side by side through the falling snow. No patrol order, no strategic purpose, only the deep animal satisfaction of running beside something you trusted absolutely, something that moved with you rather than past you, something that had taken the long and honest road to your side. They ran until they reached the highest point of Vordenmoor's territory, where the ridge met the sky and the mountains opened on every side into the wide, dark, endlessly possible north. They stopped. They stood in the falling snow and looked at the world. Then Rhaegar's black wolf turned its head and looked at her. She looked back. She shifted first. He shifted a breath after. They stood on the ridge in the falling snow, close and warm and real, with the mountains around them and the night above them and everything they had built between them, honest and unbreakable and entirely theirs. Home, he said. She looked at him, at the scar and the pale eyes, at the complete uncomplicated certainty of a man who had known what she was before she had finished becoming it. Home, she said. The snow fell soft around them. The mountains held. And somewhere to the south, in 5 kingdoms that had been changed by one woman's refusal to disappear quietly, the story of what she had built was already becoming the kind of story that gets told around fires on cold nights. Not because it was impossible, but because it was true. He chose his mistress over his fated mate, and then watched the dark alpha crown her queen of every kingdom he would never own. Not because she asked for it, not because she was given it, because she walked out of a great hall with nothing in the dark, and built something from the ground up that was stronger than everything she had left behind. Some women do not just survive betrayal. They build something from it that outlasts the person who caused it. And the most honest thing a man can do, standing in the ruins of what he threw away, is understand that what rose from those ruins was never his to claim. It was always hers.